Hey everyone, Michael Unger here with another edition of Ask an Astronomer here on a very rainy, unceded territory of Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh. And joining us as always is our astronomer that this show is named after, and that
No, it is
is
not. This show
Ms.
existed
Marley.
before me.
But your Zoom name says Astronomer Marley,
That is my
so
job title.
we had one of our interpreters get really excited because they got their first autograph. Has anyone ever asked you for an autograph before, Marley?
No, that has I have been recognized in the grocery store though, which was
Oh,
unnerving.
okay.
Yeah, that was well because I thought like she was just following me around the aisles, and I was like, I promise I'm not stealing from the grocery store. But you're also a customer. But then she was like, "Are you the astronomer at the Space Center?" And I was like, "Yes." And she was like, "Oh, I know you from the show." And I went, "Oh, cool." And then tried to leave because I don't like being at the grocery store.
That's amazing. Well, hopefully, all of you watching, if you see me or Marley out in the wild, don't say hi to us. No, I'm just joking. Come say hi to us. We love talking with folks, and we are going to be with you for the next half hour or so, answering your questions if you have them. We've got a couple topics, couple news stories that have broken up this week, broken up or broken out, broken out.
I
We
don't
heard about
know.
them. I'm not too
Yes.
sure what I'm saying. Uh,
It's the end of
but
our day. Please forgive Michael.
this
It's been
is this is
busy.
true. But we are triple streaming, so we're on YouTube, we're on Facebook, we're even on Instagram. Of course, you
Oh
may not
boy.
be able to see us, in the vertical, but if you go over to YouTube, then you can see all of us. You might even be able to see some of the pictures that Barley's going to share with us on some amazing topics. And as always, during Ask an Astronomer, if you have any questions about what we're going to talk about in the show today or anything under the universe, we will answer it before we get to the half-hour mark today. Marley, a couple big things happened. Some happy news, but then some sort of weird news from the happy news, and then some more sad news. So let's start with this sort of happy news first, and then we'll get to the sad news.
Right. So all of the stories today kind of surround tech demonstrations, which are a type of mission we don't hear about a lot, mainly because they are just tech demos. They don't last very long. They prove a concept and then they're kind of done, except when they last a long time
Okay.
or when they're particularly interesting. So quickly, what's wrong with this picture? Uh, it's from the surface of the moon. It is the JAXA SLIM mission, and SLIM stands for the Smart Lander for Investigating Moon. And, you know, on first glance, it looks like, oh, yeah, they've landed something. That's pretty cool. Except I will point out where's my little laser pointer? This is the thruster
Yeah,
of the spacecraft.
it
So this
looks
is
it looks upside down.
yeah, it's tilted 90 degrees to what it should be. It's what they said in their press conference, not in the desired orientation, which is a really nice way of saying it did not land right.
It landed on its head.
It landed on its head. Yeah, so this is the nose of the spacecraft down here. It's actually meant to sit differently. I have an image of what it's supposed to look like after this. But this is the SLIM spacecraft. It launched, way back when. It was on a ride-share mission with an X-ray space telescope. It didn't reach lunar orbit until Christmas Day. It launched in September and then made its descent to the lunar surface on January 19th. And so it took really the long way around to the moon. And, it was delayed because they had to wait for the main mission to finally be ready to launch. So the lot was riding on this mission. And this is a tech demo mission. It was meant to just show what precision lunar landing could be like. And the image, the one that took the image, is another spacecraft or a lander that was on board the main spacecraft that was jettisoned out during descent. So prior to this landing on its nose, and came over and took a photo. So regardless of the fact that it landed in not the desired orientation, Japan still considers this a success because it was able to achieve a soft landing and it was able to accurately know where it needed to land and accurately prove the technology that went into how to figure out where it was going to land. And
Mhm.
this mission makes Japan the fifth country to perform a soft landing on the lunar surface after the former USSR, the United States, China, and India. India becoming the fourth just towards the tail end of 2023.
Awesome. Well, yeah, as we've been talking about a lot around the moon, we've been talking about all these countries going back, and soon we'll be seeing a Canadian rover on the moon, hopefully in a couple of years. Is there any other countries that are planning missions besides the ones that have already landed there?
There are a lot that are planning missions. Currently, I know China's going back, but hitching a ride on that one is Pakistan, but they're doing an
Okay.
orbiter instead of a lander. And there are others like always in different stages of development, but they're never, they have to figure out how to get there is a lot of it. So there's different levels to being like a spacefaring nation. And one of them is being able to launch yourselves. And that is not something that a lot of nations can do, right? So JAXA can do their own launches. China can do their own launches. The United States can do their own launches. And India, I think India can, or they're working on it, can do their own
Hmm.
launches. Canada can't. So Canada often, if we want to send something, we have to hitch a ride onto something else. And a lot of countries that are able to, that have launched satellites, have done those sort of things, don't have the ability to launch their own spacecraft. And so they have to either pay for a ride on an ESA spacecraft, pay for a ride on a NASA spacecraft, or even go the private route. And so a lot of these planned missions don't necessarily come to fruition because a hard part is figuring out how you're going to get to the place you want to go.
Hmm. Now, what about the private companies? Are they planning any landers? I know that they've got lots of, vehicles to transport, as you just said, but what about, a rover or a lander?
I think there are some. I know there was supposed to be a lander, the Peregrine lander by Astrobotic was supposed to land last week, and it unfortunately did not, or a couple weeks ago. It unfortunately did not land. There was a problem with the fuel and the fuel propellant in that it burned for too long and so lost a bit of its fuel. And so it wasn't able to put itself on the right trajectory for a lunar landing. And on board that lander were a lot of different some private and then some public, as in like governmental, so NASA experiments that were meant to be on the surface and explore the surface and do again a lot of tech demos on the surface that never made it to the moon. The entire Peregrine lander and the associated payloads actually burned up upon reentry in Earth's atmosphere a couple days ago.
Yeah.
So it's a lot of times it's either private companies getting a ride from NASA or private companies giving a ride to NASA. So it's
Mhm.
not often that both are private at the same time.
Right, gotcha. Keith says more successful than the Kerbal space program. Uh,
Probably.
First question comes from Instagram from Ryan Blundell asks, is there any type of scheduling that all countries have to adhere to when going to the
Yeah,
moon?
so well, there's just better times to do it in terms of where the moon is relative to Earth. So if you want to get there quickly, you have to wait for a time when the moon is there. They're called like launch windows. So if you look at the Artemis launch times, right, there's certain launch windows that are better than others, and that has to do with fuel efficiency and the travel time to get there. And so if you launch during an inopportune launch window, it'll take longer for you to get there. You'll have to plan a different route, or it just won't be feasible to get there really at all with in terms of like monetary constraints and things like that. It's more often seen if you think of like the further away you get, the harder it is to get to. So if you think about going to Mars, the missions to Mars launch about once every 2 years because that's when the launch window opens up. When the planets are in the right places at the right time for people to be able to get there with the least amount of fuel the fastest possible, right? So
Mhm.
the moon's launch windows, those depending what you want to do and the type of orbit you want to have, those are open for most of the month. There's maybe like a week or so where you can't really launch or it's not feasible or a good idea to launch for the most common type of way to launch in the most direct route. But they all kind of launch whenever. It's not as strict of a schedule as say going to Mars.
And you had mentioned too that Japan went the long way around. So what was the reasoning behind that?
Probably because this was not a primary mission, right? This was a technology demonstration. And so you have to think of the cost benefit analysis, right? So I think to date, this thing is almost worth like this money spent into this mission itself was about $12 million US dollars, I think, or a bit more than that. And so the idea of launching something that might not even work is not very appealing, right? Especially to the people who have to launch it and the people who have to pay for that. It's not very appealing to do. And so what happens with these tech demos is they hitch a ride or they ride share with another mission that is like the primary mission. So in this case, Slim launched with an X-ray space telescope. And the X ray space telescope has its own trajectory that it follows, and Slim kind of just has to deal with that and then figure out when it's going to leave and figure out the best way to get to the moon after that.
Okay. All right. So Japan back on the moon, or first on the moon, but another country on the moon. So very excited to see the moon get very busy, as it will be throughout the rest of this Artemis mission as it continues on. So let's move on to some of more somber stories. They'll still kind of exciting because we're celebrating the end of a very of a mission that we all loved, and that is Ingenuity on Mars.
I'm so sad. Like, I knew that this day would come eventually. I'm really sad that it's here. So today, actually, it was announced, I think it was like 11 a.m. NASA formally announced the end of the Ingenuity mission. So its mission has ended. It's a bit different. Typically, when we think of mission ends on Mars, we think of the fact that we're no longer able to communicate with the spacecraft.
Hmm.
Like in cases like OPI and Spirit and InSight most recently. But in this case, we are still able to communicate with Ingenuity. It's just that it can't complete its mission anymore, which is to fly. So,
Yes.
yeah, no, it's so sad. The final flight was flight number 72. This happened on January 18th, 2024. It was designed to be a quick vertical flight to check systems, and that has to do with doing a systems check based on information gained from Flight 71, the previous flight. The spacecraft or Ingenuity lost contact with the rover. So, how Ingenuity talks to us on Earth is it actually talks to Perseverance, and Perseverance then talks to us. And for whatever reason, it lost contact with Perseverance about a meter above the surface. We were able to reestablish communications the next day, and several days later, the imagery was brought down, which shows the shadow of one of the rotor blades broken.
Hmm.
Yes, so it cannot fly anymore, which is quite sad and is really the end of the mission. What we know so far is that obviously, most likely, the blade struck the surface. There was a question of if this divot is where the blade struck or not. But if you look a little bit further, you can kind of see the foot of the space of the
Mm.
helicopter over here. And so it's not entirely certain whether or not this is a divot from a foot of the helicopter that then moved, or if something else happened, or if it is where the blade struck the ground. So they're just not entirely sure yet as to what happened. And what will also make it more difficult to know what happened is because Ingenuity lost contact with the rover, um, the last bit of the descent data is gone, right? It was lost because
Mm.
after it landed, it was transmitting the data, and that data, there was a brownout, is what it's called when it loses communication. And so that data was not savable to disk. And so it's just lost. And so we'll never really know, like, we'll never have the data to tell us what happened. And so the engineers on the team of Ingenuity kind of have to work backwards based on what they have.
Mm.
And there's no way to know if the comms loss came first and then the rotor strike, or the rotor strike and then the comms loss happened. But regardless, like, we just don't have the data. It's gone.
Very strange.
Well, it's just sad. Like, it actually ties into kind of with the problems that Ingenuity was having.
Mm.
So the terrain of the last couple flights, so flight 70 into flight 72, were some of the most featureless terrain that Ingenuity has ever flown over. And Ingenuity, to navigate itself, it uses rocks and boulders. And so a featureless terrain like you're seeing here, this image is from flight 70, is not great. It makes it very hard for the helicopter to know where it is and to know where she's going. And it was this flat terrain that caused an emergency landing for Flight 71, so the previous flight. It did fly up during Flight 71, but then it had an unplanned early landing. So Ingenuity, they uploaded itself. Engineers gave Ingenuity the power to self-terminate a landing, right? To self-terminate a flight. It will perform an emergency landing. So it didn't know where it was anymore, and so it did a emergency landing and landed during Flight 71.
Mm.
They think that that's also what happened during Flight 72, is that it wasn't able to know what it was. It was trying to perform an emergency landing, and then something happened on the way down that caused the blade to break.
Very curious. Yeah, this is really interesting. I hadn't really thought of Ingenuity needing the terrain in order for it to navigate around. And of course, there are some parts of Mars, like you're showing us here, that don't have that terrain to navigate. So do you think that there's any possible solutions for the future? Of course, like this was another of those test missions, Ingenuity was really just testing the technology for this type of flight on another world. Do you think that the types of AI navigation systems can be improved upon?
Yeah, but that's not what caused it to like what the grounding of Ingenuity is because of the rotor blade strike, the blade strike, right?
Right.
It can't fly with that damage. The AI, a lot of what could fix that is not necessarily the AI. The AI is pretty good. It's similar to what Perseverance uses, but actually just higher resolution cameras. The thing with Ingenuity is that a lot of its cameras are essentially scaled down cell phone cameras.
Oh,
A
okay.
lot of the pieces of the helicopter are just off the shelf commercial, like it has lithium ion batteries that you can get from like home hardware.
Mhm.
Like it's not a like robust NASA mission you might think of, right? And so a lot of the things that it's just made of just ended they have a shorter lifespan on board, right? And so having a higher resolution camera would have helped probably with it being able to actually identify what it was seeing and what it was looking at. And sometimes, things make mistakes. It may have seen a dune as a boulder and tried to avoid it, but then ended up landing in a place where it shouldn't have. So just having better eyes would help as well.
Okay. And of course, you have some updates on the rest of the mission.
Yeah, so what's kind of cool about this is that they're able to kind of go through like I don't want to call it a postmortem, but it's kind of like the previous things that have happened to it. So it kind of paints this picture, right? So flight 70 is when we start to encounter that challenging terrain. Ingenuity was flying northwest, heading towards a crater rim, and that's when it started to fly over this very bland, sandy terrain. 71 is where we have our first emergency landing, which it managed to land and it was safe. And then the 72nd flight is when we have the mission end. And this wasn't a very complicated flight. It was just a pop-up flight. So just going vertically, hovering, and then landing, which there was a communications brownout and then the rotor damage. NASA did a press conference at 2 p.m. today that I watched that ended at 3. And then I put this presentation together and now I'm here. But it was all about what happened with this mission and what they think happened. And one of the great questions that was asked was, could Ingenuity possibly fly again, even with the damage? And what one of the project, I think it was the project lead, ended up saying was that no, it's entirely impossible. And it's actually pretty likely that more than one blade has been damaged because the blade system on Ingenuity rotates at 2,500 RPM. So it's very likely that more than one blade hit the surface of Mars and broke off.
Mm.
They also said that and this I kind of knew, but they explained it in a really good way. What's missing from the rest of the blade is about 25% of the rest of the blade, right? So it lost about a quarter of its blade length. In like, even if other blades weren't damaged, the physics won't allow Ingenuity to fly anymore. Most of the lift generated in a propeller like helicopter system like this comes from the last 25 to 35% of your blade. And so with Ingenuity missing that, it simply can't produce enough thrust to be able to lift the entire spacecraft or the entire helicopter. And even, if it could generate enough thrust, it is a perfectly balanced rotor system. So
Mhm.
with this last piece of the rotor missing, it's off balance and the forces as it spins will begin to shake the helicopter apart and it would end up destroyed anyway.
Right.
So even if there is no other damage, like the laws of physics won't allow it to fly, which I
Yeah.
thought was a very fitting end to the rotocopter because it was thought that the laws of physics wouldn't allow it to fly in the first place with
Right.
Ingenuity, right? When this mission was first, kind of announced and proposed, there was a lot of skepticism that it would even be possible, right? The atmosphere on Mars is incredibly thin, and so it was thought that there would simply not be enough particles that would ever generate enough lift. Like there simply was not enough stuff in the air, enough particles in the air to produce the force necessary for something to fly on the planet. And Ingenuity proved them wrong. It was only meant to fly 5 flights for about 29 sols. And it flew 72 incredibly successful flights. At 9 p.m. tonight, it marks its 1,000th sol on Mars, which is
Hmm.
pretty cool. And it even went from a tech demo phase to an operations phase, where it was actively helping Perseverance as Perseverance traversed around the surface of Mars. And it's gone on to inspire, new generations of technology. When I first started working at the Space Center, the sample return mission was only a mission that featured like another rover that would go pick up the samples and come back. And now it's been proposed that instead of a rover, we use the second generation of Ingenuity based rotocopters to go deal with those samples, right?
Hmm.
So it has really changed the game in terms of how we can explore planets and what we can do with powered space flight. It proved that powered and controlled flight is possible on other worlds aside from Earth.
Yeah, and this is really going to help the Dragonfly mission that's
Mhm.
proposed to go to Saturn's moon Titan, right? Because that's also using a similar type of technology.
Yeah, it is. And what's really interesting about the Titan mission is that the primary mission is a helicopter, right? Which we had, it was like, how are we going to proof of concept this, that it'll even work, right? With Perseverance, what Ingenuity launched with, we knew that rovers like that worked. Perseverance is very much based upon curiosity, right? Even down to the 7 seconds of terror, right down to the landing. So with Dragonfly, a lot from Ingenuity has already been incorporated into that mission, and they've learned from what went wrong with Ingenuity and what went right with Ingenuity, and have incorporated that into the Dragonfly mission for a world completely separate and very different from Mars.
Yeah. So, well, let's get a quick update on Perseverance because Perseverance mission is still ongoing, right?
Yeah. So there was a lot of questions in the press conference, like what happens now with Perseverance now that Ingenuity is gone? And the answer is like it just continues. It just keeps
You gotta
going.
move on,
You
Perseverance. You
gotta
gotta
move
move
on.
on.
Well, the thing is that Ingenuity was never mission critical to Perseverance,
Yeah.
right? It was kind of just like an added benefit that it was there. And so without it, it's not really a net win or loss. It's just what it is. They plan to not have Ingenuity, so they can continue without Ingenuity. What is kind of sad is that I think currently the rover is about 500 meters away from Ingenuity. Um, there's the hope that the Ingenuity team will be able to get photos from Perseverance to try to show the extent of the damage.
Hmm.
But the mission continues, right? So Perseverance is headed west and it is continuing its sample depot mission. And it will get, I think, within 200 to 300 meters is what they said in the press conference, and no closer. So it's not going to get close and take a picture. It's probably not going to be a great photo from Perseverance, and then it'll continue on its mission. The problem with that is the further away Perseverance gets from Ingenuity, the harder it's going to be to contact Ingenuity because that's the relay system. We talk to Ingenuity through Perseverance, and Ingenuity talks to Earth through Perseverance. It's the link. And once Perseverance is a certain distance from Ingenuity, we like that'll be goodbye. We won't hear from Ingenuity anymore, and it won't hear us. So that is kind of the really sad part about it, is that
Right.
these two that have kind of gone on this journey together, Ingenuity was stored in Perseverance's belly and descended from Earth, descended
Aw,
from it in April of 2021. Now
his
they'll be
mom.
apart. It kind of, yeah, it's mom. Like it'll be, they'll be apart, and you think of them as these two things that have been together for a very long time, about a year, or just about, part of the operations mission for Ingenuity was scouting ahead for Perseverance and taking photos
Mm,
of terrain. And they had a period of time where they kind of worked together, and now that's ending. So it was quite a bit of an emotional press conference as well as an update. It was a very emotional update.
right. Well, great. Hopefully, just like the moon, we're going to get more updates on Perseverance as it continues its mission. We salute Ingenuity. It was so exciting to see that mission be so successful. Put into the comments if you have any final words for Ingenuity if you are watching. Any last things on Mars before we give over to the last few questions for the show today, Marty?
No, I'm done with Mars. I'm really bummed about this. actually. So questions are welcome.
All right. Well, if you're watching on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, and you've got any questions, anything under the universe, we'll go back to the beginnings. We started talking about launching. We did have a few questions kind of generally about launching. So GG12358 asks, how does harsh weather affect the launches? And have there ever been times where weather was predicted incorrectly, and how would that affect the launch?
Oh, okay. So this goes all the way back to like go no go. So this go no go is a period of time when if we're gonna go, we have to go now, right? And this is like the last possible chance we can do it. You can one of the more recent times this happened that I remember is actually with Artemis 1. If you go all the way back to that mission, there was a while where it was on the launch pad and it was like, are we go no go? And it was like, no, we're no go, right? Because of something to do with propellant or something to do with fuel. I don't know, like 1,000 different problems. And then the whole rocket had to be moved off of the launch pad because of a hurricane, right? So remember, yeah, Hurricane Ian.
Yeah, that's right.
So yeah, so weather can have is will can't make or break a launch, right? If there is any chance of inclement or mission risk weather, they will not launch. They will no go and they will not go. I don't know if there probably has been a time where the weather was predicted as no go and then it was fine, but I don't know if it's ever caused a launch to be delayed in that way. It's usually the opposite. It's usually weather looks good for tomorrow, and then they wake up and they're like, never mind, weather is bad, we can't go. It's usually that way.
Right. And related to launching, Keith asks, is latitude a factor in ease of launching? Is Canada's latitude a factor in Canada not being able to launch its own spacecraft?
Yeah, it's latitude and space, like where you are. So there's a couple things to consider. You want to be at a latitude that gains you easy access to orbits that you want to be on. In terms of Canada, we're so far north, we're actually really good at getting into we're like a good enough spot to getting into polar and geostationary orbits, I believe. It's just that we don't have a ton of space to build a launch pad the size of things that would launch, to the moon. There is actually a spaceport now built in Nova Scotia by a private company that has launch capabilities. The other thing to consider is weather, right? So here we get snowstorms and windstorms, and on the coast you have hurricanes and things like that. So that is also something to consider, as well as temperature. You don't want to be at a very cold temperature. If you remember the tragedy of the Challenger mission, right? Where that repeated warming and cooling of the O-ring led to loss of life after launch. And so that is also something to consider. There's also the fact that at different places on the Earth, you will have a different escape velocity necessary. So right around Cape Canaveral, it's about 11.2 kilometers per second. I think further north, it's a bit more closer to 12, right? So you have to move faster, which means more propellant. And so all of that has to be considered. And there's the final biggest thing, which is you don't want to launch over a populated area, right? So you don't want anywhere in your launch path, you don't want it to be over populous places. That's why in Florida is a good spot. Geographically, you just got the ocean, so it's not as big as a problem. And you also want to launch with the spin of the Earth. That'll give you extra speed. You don't want to launch the opposite direction. So there's a lot of different factors, and latitude is one of them.
Yeah. I believe at some point I remember reading stories that there was proposed launch pad on Vancouver Island as well. So kind of looking towards the coasts because you don't want it overpopulated areas, but neither Nova Scotia or Vancouver Island have the most consistent weather, right? So it would be like and I guess like I'm curious to see how that one in Nova Scotia develops, and if it does end up being a regular launch pad or if it's only launching during certain times of the year.
Yeah, that will be interesting to see. I know that one is specifically for satellites, so it won't be
Right.
launching people. It's all satellites. But even to have any sort of launch pad in Canada is pretty cool. But yeah, it's small compared to Cape Canaveral.
Exactly. Well, that brings us to the end of the episode. If you've got any final questions you want to get in before the end of the show, throw them in there now. Thank you all so much for joining us and for joining on many different forums. If you want to watch the full video, if you joined midway, you can go to YouTube. The full video is up, as well as all of our previous episodes. We've got about 4 years worth. We started this show at the beginning of the pandemic in 2020, so we've got a whole bunch of backlog to get to and a couple different astronomers to watch as well. We're heading into February. We're still in our theme of magnetism. We've got some events coming up, including our big Valentine's event. So that is a 19+ event. So if you're an adult out there and you're looking for a fun thing to do on February 14th, we've got a fantastic event lined up where we're going to be serving beer and wine, and we've got catered food. Plus we have a special listening room. So that's all music and visuals in our planetarium to a special Valentine's magnetism playlist. And Marley is going to be joined by a journalist that lives in the Northwest Territories. He takes photographs and video of the Aurora Borealis. And so we're going to be talking to him. He's going to be remoting in, and Marley's going to be talking about the Aurora and how potentially we might even be able to see it occasionally even here in the Lower Mainland. Thank you all so much for watching this episode of Ask an Astronomer. We will be back here live in 2 weeks. That will be February the 8th, 4 p.m. Pacific time. See you all then.